Her name was Ajike, but everyone who loved her called her AJ. She was born on January 13, 1988, in Broward County, Florida, the daughter of Pamela Diaz, a woman who would later describe her as not just her daughter, but her first true friend. AJ grew up moving between Broward and Marion counties, attending public schools, navigating a childhood that was not always easy, in the way that single-parent households in working-class Florida communities are not always easy. She graduated from Vanguard High School in Ocala in 2006. She attended two colleges, the College of Central Florida and Hillsborough State College. She studied, she worked, she built something. She became a manager in the food service industry. At the time of her death, she was the head guest department manager at a McDonald's location in Ocala. She was ServSafe certified. She was known by co-workers as someone who would rearrange her entire schedule, take different shifts, stay late, come in early, just so she could be present for her children's activities. A neighbor who knew her said it plainly in a documentary about her life. She was the mom. She was a manager for McDonald's. Ajike would switch her schedule around just so she could be there for her kids. Someone who sacrificed for the children to have private school, football lessons, gymnastics, dance, everything. She was a single mother of 4. Their names are Isaac, Israel, Africa, and Titus. When she died, they were 12, 9, 7, and 3 years old. Her best friend, who was also the godmother to her children, said this about her. Ajike adored her children. She lived and breathed for them, day in and day out. She made sacrifices as a single mom to be there for them in each and every stage of their lives. She would never want to miss a football game, a practice, cheerleading. She was there. They were her world. They were her everything. She was known in her community for giving to other single mothers who were going through what she had been through herself. She mentored young women. She showed up. She had a smile, her family said, that lit up every room she walked into. She was 35 years old when she walked across a road in Ocala, Florida, on the evening of June 2, 2023, to knock on her neighbor's door and ask her to stop harassing her children. She was shot through that door. Her 9-year-old son, Israel, was standing beside her when the bullet hit. AJ Owens died at the hospital that night, surrounded by a world that had not yet had time to understand what had just happened. To understand the night AJ Owens was killed, you have to understand the 2 years that came before it. Because this was not a spontaneous act. It was not a misunderstanding that escalated without warning. It was the final moment of something that had been building since at least January 2021. Something that law enforcement had documented, that neighbors had witnessed, and that nobody had managed to stop. The Quail Run apartment complex in northwest Ocala is a modest working-class neighborhood. The kind of place where people know each other's routines, where kids play outside because there isn't much indoor space, where the grassy areas between buildings become the playgrounds by default. AJ and her 4 children lived in one unit. Susan Lorincz, a 58-year-old white woman, lived in an adjacent apartment. Between them was a grassy field, and that field became the battleground. Lorincz had developed what neighbors described as a fixation on AJ's children playing in that grass. She claimed the space as her own, though it was common area belonging to no one individually. She called 911 on the children, repeatedly. The Marion County Sheriff's Office had responded to approximately 6 documented calls involving Lorincz and the Owens household since January 2021. Calls in which Lorincz alleged trespass, alleged harassment, alleged that children playing outdoors near her apartment were somehow a threat to her safety. Neighbors told investigators and reporters what they saw during those 2 years. They said Lorincz was angry all the time when it came to these kids. They said she would shout at them. They said she used racial slurs. Specifically, multiple witnesses reported that Lorincz called AJ's children the N-word and referred to them as, in the language that appears in the arrest affidavit, Black S. She filmed them. She waved a gun in their direction on at least one occasion, according to neighbors. She tried to create, through a sustained campaign of calls and confrontations, a world in which 4 Black children could not play outside in the afternoon without being surveilled, threatened, and reported to law enforcement. AJ did what any parent would do. She filed her own complaints. She tried to document the harassment. She talked to neighbors about what was happening. She attempted, repeatedly, to find some path toward resolution that didn't require her children to simply stop existing in outdoor spaces that they had every right to occupy. 2 years. Dozens of incidents. A community that watched. Law enforcement that responded and responded and responded and never found a way to make it stop. On the evening of June 2nd, 2023, it stopped. But not in the way AJ deserved. Here is what happened in the last hour of AJ Owens' life. Her son Israel, 9 years old, the one everyone called Izzy, was playing in the field near Lorinc's apartment that evening. His older brother Isaac, 12, was playing basketball in the street nearby. Their younger siblings were inside. At some point in the early evening, Lorincz came outside and got into an altercation with the children. She threw a roller skate at Israel. It hit him in the toe. She then swung at the boys with an umbrella when they approached her door to speak with her. The boys went home and told their mother what had happened. AJ Owens put on her shoes and walked across the road. She was not armed. She did not bring a weapon of any kind. She knocked on Susan Lorinc's door, multiple times, loudly, calling out for Lorincz to come outside and have a conversation, one adult to another, about what had just happened to her son. Inside the apartment, Susan Lorincz called 911 at approximately 9 p.m. She told the dispatcher that she felt threatened by Owens and her children. She reported them as trespassers. She said she was afraid. Deputies from the Marion County Sheriff's Office were already en route. They had received Lorintz's call. They were in their cars, driving to the apartment complex minutes away. Susan Lorincz knew the police were coming. She was on the phone with them. Help was literally in motion. She hung up the phone, walked to her bedroom, picked up a .380 caliber handgun, walked back to her front door, and fired one shot through the locked, closed, windowless door. The bullet struck AJ Owens in the upper chest. Israel watched his mother fall. He called 911 at 9:04 p.m. and told the dispatcher that his mother had been shot and that she was only knocking on the door. He was 9 years old. He is the one who called for help. While his mother lay on the ground outside a locked door, bleeding from a bullet fired through wood by a woman who was safe inside a locked apartment with police already on the way, her 9-year-old son made the call. AJ Owens was transported to the hospital. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Let me stop and ask you something directly, because I want you to sit with the specific physics of this before we go any further. Susan Lorincz was behind a locked door. The door was windowless. She could not see AJ. The police were in their cars, minutes away, responding to her own 911 call. She knew they were coming. She had just told them she was scared, and they had told her help was on the way. AJ Owens was unarmed and outside. The door was locked. The judge who sentenced Lorincz said it plainly from the bench. He said, "She could have stayed in the room and put another locked door between her and Ms. Owens. But she came back out, put herself in front of the door, and at the time she fired the gun through the door, she was safe." He said, "The shooting was completely unnecessary." He said, "The shooting was based, I find, more in anger than in fear." Think about the gap between those two things, fear and anger. They can look the same from the outside. The racing heart, the shaking hands, the sense that something terrible is about to happen. But they produce different decisions. Fear makes you call the police and wait. Anger makes you pick up a gun. AJ Owens was knocking on a door. She was loud. She was insistent. She was a mother whose child had just been hit by a roller skate thrown by this same woman. And she wanted a conversation that should have happened 2 years earlier. She deserved that conversation. She did not get it. What happened in the 4 days between June 2nd and June 6th is the part of this story that sent Ocala, and then the country, into an uproar. Susan Lorincz was not arrested the night AJ died. Deputies arrived, found AJ on the ground, transported her to the hospital. They spoke to Lorincz. They heard her account, that she feared for her life, that Owens had been threatening to break down her door, that she had acted in self-defense. and then they evaluated whether Florida's Stand Your Ground law prevented them from making an immediate arrest. The Stand Your Ground statute, signed into law in Florida in 2005, allows individuals to use deadly force if they reasonably believe it is necessary to prevent death or serious injury. Crucially, it removes the traditional legal duty to retreat. You do not have to try to escape the situation before using force if you are in a place you have a lawful right to be. The law has been controversial since its passage, and its application in cases involving Black victims killed by white shooters has been a specific and documented point of criticism since the 2012 killing of Trayvon Martin in Sanford, Florida, also involving a shooter who claimed self-defense, also resulting in a delayed legal response that felt, to many communities, like the law protecting the person who pulled the trigger at the expense of the person who was killed. Marion County Sheriff Billy Woods held a press conference on June 5th, 3 days after AJ died, and told reporters that his department was evaluating the Stand Your Ground statute before making an arrest. He noted that they had primarily heard from Lorincz and were still working to interview witnesses, including AJ's children. AJ's mother, Pamela Diaz, told reporters, "When does a person get shot for knocking on a door?" 30 protesters gathered outside the Marion County Judicial Center the following day. Civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump, who had represented the families of Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, and others, entered the case on behalf of the Owens family and publicly called for Lorinc's arrest. He described the killing as an unconscionable act and said the law was being used, once again, as a shield for a white person who had shot an unarmed Black woman. On June 6th, 4 days after AJ's death, investigators completed their interviews and reviewed the forensic evidence and video. They arrested Susan Lorincz and charged her with manslaughter with a firearm, culpable negligence, battery, and 2 counts of assault. The sheriff, at that press conference, said something that I think deserves to be heard clearly. He said, "This situation is a prime example of when Stand Your Ground was not justified. It was simply a killing." The phrase that should have prevented the arrest, "Stand Your Ground," was publicly called out by the arresting sheriff as inapplicable. The law that had delayed justice for 4 days was, by the judgment of the man who invoked it, never the right lens for this case at all. Before we go further, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. City, state, country. I want to see this community from everywhere. And if this is your first time on Close Circle Crime Stories, this is what we do. Every week we go deep on the cases that deserve more light than they've gotten. If that's your kind of content, hit subscribe. It genuinely makes a difference. The outrage did not end with the arrest. Because while the arrest was necessary, it was not sufficient, and AJ's family made clear from the moment charges were filed that the charge itself was wrong. Manslaughter, not murder. AJ's family and their attorneys pushed for second-degree murder from the beginning. The distinction matters enormously, not just for the sentence, but for what it says about what the law understands happened to AJ Owens. Second-degree murder in Florida requires proof of a depraved mind, evidence of hatred, spite, ill will, or evil intent toward the victim at the time of the killing. State Attorney William Gladson said his office carefully examined both charges and determined that while the evidence supported manslaughter beyond reasonable doubt, the depraved mind standard required for second-degree murder was harder to prove given the specific circumstances. The family's attorney, Anthony Thomas, filed a formal request to upgrade the charge. It was denied. Here is where the case becomes not just a tragedy, but a debate, and a debate worth having honestly. The prosecution's argument was that Lorinc's action, while criminal and unjustifiable, fell into the legal category of manslaughter rather than murder because of the ambiguity of her stated mental state. She claimed fear. The forensic evidence contradicted elements of her account. But fear, even irrational fear, even fear the law ultimately rejected, creates legal complexity around the word depraved. The family's argument was simpler and, in my view, harder to dismiss. Lorincz had been harassing their children for 2 years using racial slurs. She had waved a gun at them. She had called 911 on them repeatedly. She had thrown objects at them. And on the night she shot their mother, she had been on the phone with 911, was behind a locked door, had police on the way, and she went and got her gun anyway. If that pattern of behavior, culminating in a shot fired through a door at a black woman who came to protect her children, does not meet the standard of depraved mind, what does? That question has no clean legal answer, but it has a very clear moral one. The trial began on August 12, 2024, in Marion County Circuit Court in Ocala. From the beginning, there was a detail that AJ's family's attorneys noted publicly and that drew national attention. The jury was all white, 6 people. In a case about a white woman who had used racial slurs against black children for 2 years and then shot their black mother through a door. 6 white jurors. Family attorney Anthony Thomas said they were disappointed in the jury's composition. Attorney Ben Crump said the family believed in equal justice and would see what happened. The state attorney's office noted that the jury selection process is governed by law and that both sides exercise challenges. The trial lasted 1 week. The prosecution presented evidence that Lorincz had no credible basis for fearing for her life, that the locked door protected her, that police were coming, that AJ was not attempting to break in, that no witness supported Lorincz's claim that AJ had threatened to kill her. Detective interrogation footage showed Lorincz telling investigators she fired because she was in mortal danger. The detective on the tape told her flatly, "No one that we've interviewed so far has made any statements about her saying that she wanted to kill you." The defense presented a picture of a woman with PTSD from childhood sexual abuse, a woman who was terrified, a woman who made a tragic mistake in a moment of overwhelming fear. Her sister testified about the abuse they had both experienced at the hands of their father. A forensic psychologist testified that Lorincz's PTSD had substantially impaired her ability to appreciate the criminality of her conduct in that moment, that she had genuinely believed the locked door would not hold. On August 16th, after 2 hours of deliberation, the all-white jury found Susan Lorincz guilty of manslaughter with a firearm. Not murder, manslaughter. AJ's family wept in the courtroom. One family member called out, "Oh God, thank you, Jesus." It was the cry of people who had waited more than a year for a verdict and received something they could call justice, knowing even in that moment that it was incomplete. The sentencing hearing took place on November 25, 2024, 3.5 hours long. AJ's mother, Pamela Diaz, spoke for more than 30 minutes. She stood in front of the court and talked about her daughter, about who AJ was, not just how she died. She talked about dreams, about the futures AJ had been building, the ones that would never now happen. She said, "I'm still trying to grasp and cope with the fact that my daughter, my baby girl, is lying 6 feet underground, breathless, lifeless." She talked about her grandchildren, about what they had lost, about the landmarks AJ would not be there for. She said, she won't be present for the baptisms, the prom, the graduations, their first love, their first breakups, engagements, marriages, children, all the pivotal moments, all the important moments that a parent and a child share together. Then Susan Lorincz spoke. She looked at AJ's family and said, "I'm so sorry that I took AJ's life. I never intended to kill her. I'm just profoundly sad. Not only did a mother die, but a daughter, a sister." She said she thought of the family's loss and knew how hard it was to lose someone you love. Pamela Diaz was asked about the apology after the hearing. She said, "Susan's apology was a last-ditch attempt to save herself. It wasn't sincere. She never showed remorse. As I stated before, her remorse, if any, at best, was for herself." Judge Robert Hodges sentenced Lorincz to 25 years in prison, 5 years below the maximum of 30. He cited her childhood trauma and absence of prior criminal record as mitigating factors. He was explicit that these did not justify what she had done. He said the impact on AJ's children, who would live their whole lives without their mother, was a harm he could not minimize. He sentenced her to 25 years. She is currently serving that sentence at the Homestead Correctional Institution in South Florida. I want to talk about Israel Owens because I think his story is the one that stays with you longest. He was 9 years old when he stood beside his mother and watched her fall. He is the one who called 911. He is the one who told the dispatcher that his mother had been shot and that she was only knocking on the door. In the documentary about this case, it was revealed that after the shooting, Israel and his older brother Isaac blamed themselves. Their grandmother went on national television and said the boys had been on an emotional roller coaster, consumed with guilt, believing that if they had not been playing in that field, their mother would still be alive. Think about what that means. A 9-year-old boy and a 12-year-old boy carrying, in their small bodies, the weight of a decision made by a 58-year-old woman with a gun. A decision that had nothing to do with them except that they were the reason their mother walked across the road. Isaac and Israel were named as potential witnesses for the trial. Their grandmother said publicly, "I wish they did not have to testify. But if this is what it takes to get justice, and this is what we have to do." In the end, the prosecution decided not to call them to the stand. The judge and attorneys apparently agreed that what these boys had already endured was enough. AJ's 4 children, Isaac, Israel, Africa, and Titus, now live with their grandmother, Pamela Diaz. She has become their parent in the absence of the person who was supposed to fill that role for decades more. She gets up every day, she said in an interview, and musters the courage to face the world and make sure they are okay. She said, "The hurt hasn't subsided. There's a void in their hearts no one can fill. They're the bravest people I know. They get up every day and go forward, but they still mourn and weep for their mother. This is trauma they'll carry for the rest of their lives." Here is the question. This case demands we answer honestly, and it is not a comfortable one. Why manslaughter and not murder? I have read the state attorney's explanation carefully. I understand the legal standard for second-degree murder in Florida. I understand that depraved mind requires a specific evidentiary showing that the prosecution determined they could not make beyond reasonable doubt given the specific facts. But here is what I also know. Susan Lorincz had called the police on AJ's children dozens of times over 2 years. She had used racial slurs against them repeatedly and admitted to it. She had thrown objects at them. She had waved a gun in their direction. She had, by every account from every neighbor, made their outdoor play a target of sustained, racially motivated harassment for the entire time they had been neighbors. And on the night she shot AJ, she was behind a locked door with police on the way, having just gotten off the phone with 911. The judge said it himself. She was safe. She chose to go get the gun. She chose to come back to the door. She chose to fire through it. If that is not a depraved mind, I genuinely do not understand what the standard is meant to protect. The prosecution made a legal calculation. They chose the charge they were most confident they could prove. They got a conviction. 25 years. There is an argument that this is justice working as it should, careful, measured, focused on what can be proven. But AJ's family looked at that calculation and said, "My daughter was killed by a woman who had been targeting her children with racial slurs for 2 years, and the charge is manslaughter, and I cannot find a way to tell them they are wrong." In the 2 years since AJ's death, her mother, Pamela Diaz, has said publicly that their healing is ongoing, that it will always be ongoing, that no verdict and no sentence and no documentary can close the space that AJ's absence creates in their lives every single day. She said, "My daughter, Ajike, was joyful, vibrant, and devoted to her 4 children. She was supermom. She was the football mom. She worked hard to provide a better life for them." She said she hopes AJ knows that her name is now tied to change, that her life continues to inspire action and community care, that the advocacy her death has generated, the conversations about stand your ground, about racial bias in law enforcement, about what it means for a Black mother to be unable to protect her children from a neighbor who calls them slurs and throws things at them, is a legacy that AJ would have cared about. A mural of AJ's face was painted in downtown Ocala. It was described by organizers as a community's commitment to healing through truth. Her smile is on a wall in the city where she lived and raised her children and managed a McDonald's and switched her schedule around for football practice and never once stopped showing up. Her children stood at her one-year memorial, and one of them read a poem that contained the line, "My mom is my hero. Forever will she be in my heart." Pamela Diaz watched them dance at that memorial and said she felt that they were dancing for their mom, that she was smiling down on them. Here is where I land. Ajike Owens did nothing wrong. She went to her neighbor's door because her child had been hit by a roller skate. She was loud. She was insistent. She was a mother who had spent 2 years watching her children be harassed and degraded and threatened. And on that specific evening, something physical had happened to one of them, and she was done waiting for someone else to make it stop. She was unarmed. The door was locked. The police were coming. Her 9-year-old son was standing beside her. Susan Lorincz picked up a gun and fired through the door. She is in prison, 25 years. The judge said the shooting was completely unnecessary and based more in anger than in fear. That is not nothing. That is accountability, in the form that the legal system was able to deliver it. But accountability and justice are not always the same thing. And Ajike's family knows the difference. They know what charge was filed and what charge wasn't. They know what jury was seated. They know their daughter and mother is buried in Highland Memorial Park in Ocala, while the woman who killed her will be eligible for release, depending on sentencing guidelines and time served, before Ajike's youngest child, Titus, is fully grown. Stand Your Ground did not ultimately protect Lorincz. The sheriff said it didn't apply. The jury convicted her. The judge gave 25 years. But Stand Your Ground was the reason 4 days passed before an arrest was made. And those 4 days, the days when a community watched and wondered and had to organize protests and call attorneys and appear on television just to have a murder investigation treated as a murder investigation. Those 4 days are also part of this story. They are the part that tells you something about which lives the law moves quickly to protect, and which lives it makes wait. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Drop your city. And tell me, do you think manslaughter was the right charge? Or should this have been murder? I want to hear what you actually think, not what is easy to say. Ajike Owens was 35 years old. Her youngest child was 3. Her oldest was 12. She was the football mom, the team mom, the woman who switched her shifts, the woman who gave to other single mothers from her own limited resources, the woman whose smile lit up every room. She deserved to knock on that door and have someone open it. I'll read every single comment, and I'll see you in the next one.